Welcome. This video is going to introduce you to our PH 107 ethics course and tell you what the course is about and introduce you to what exactly ethics is and what we'll be studying. There's a second video on this voice thread, which if you advance the arrows to the end of this section, you'll find another video that explains what you have to do, how to use the website, how to use VoiceThread, how you'll be graded, and what things you actually have to do to be successful in the course, those things that many of you will be most interested in. But this part is just going to be telling you what the course is. So ethics is a systematic study of the rational principles of moral behavior and how philosophically you make moral decisions. That means it attempts to figure out what the right and the wrong things to do are, and it does so using only natural reason. It's unlike many theology courses or many systems of ethics and morality that are based upon certain types of religious beliefs, based upon revealed truths in various different religious texts. We're going to be seeing what can you figure out about what's right or wrong or what makes you a good person based only on reason without the aid of revelation. As you'll see, we're going to be studying some of the traditional philosophical views about the basis of morality. And we'll be most interested in learning methods of using philosophical methods of argumentation or reasoning to think about moral issues and to apply them to some of the moral issues that are the most important ones that contemporary thought and contemporary life is dealing with. So this is a philosophy course, and that means that it will work and evaluate you a little differently than other courses that you may have had. You probably had a smattering of philosophy and conversatio. Maybe some of you have had your PH 105 Human Nature seminar already. So maybe you know that the word philosophy means love of wisdom. And it's not a subject matter like your other courses. It's more a way of approaching a subject matter. It's a stance towards life and reality. It's more or less synonymous with a desire for a certain type of self-consciousness about what we're about and about what we're studying. So that means for you that most of the course and most of your grade in the course isn't going to be about just learning facts or theories, although you are going to have to learn some of the basic moral theories that have influenced Western thought and the Catholic intellectual tradition. But it's mostly going to be about getting you to figure out what you think about contemporary moral issues and about morality in general, and to formulate them self-consciously by being able to be aware of what assumptions you're basing your ideas on. And then most importantly, defending them with arguments. Most of your grade in this class will be determined by your essays that you write defending a position on one of the issues that we talk about, and then defending it with philosophical arguments. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about methods of philosophical argument and objections and replies. Our plan for the course is to introduce you to 4 basic traditional moral theories: Aristotelian virtue ethics, utilitarianism, which was a view that arose in the 19th century, the ethical theories of the Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant, and then natural law theory, stemming from St. Thomas Aquinas and the Catholic intellectual tradition. And then lastly, we're going to look at not really a philosophical moral teaching, but the moral teachings that can be deduced from Jesus' sayings within the Gospels. Sometimes this is called the ethics of love or the gospel of love. And we're going to be looking at philosophical attempts to make sense of the demands of those teachings by thinkers like Fyodor Dostoevsky, Emmanuel Levinas, and the French philosopher Simone Weil. So those are the 5 basic units of the course. And in each of those units, we'll also be talking about contemporary moral questions, which you'll then have to take a position on and write about, both in a series of debates that we're going to have, and also in the essays that you'll write for the unit quizzes. the 5 corresponding to the 5 units that we just mentioned. So the contemporary moral issues that we'll talk about are moral integrity. Just how important is morality in human life, and is it the most important thing? We'll talk about whether we have a right to health care, whether we're obligated to do something about climate change, whether the form of capitalism that we live under is inherently immoral. We'll talk about whether it's moral to lie. We'll talk about just war theory and whether more is inherently immoral. We'll talk about sexual ethics and whether it's immoral to have sex outside of marriage, or whether sex between same-sex persons is allowable. We'll also talk about issues dealing with human embryos like stem cells and abortion. We have a unit on systemic racism. And lastly, we'll talk about immigration policy and moral issues arising from immigration in relationship to the ethics of love or the teachings of Jesus. So what exactly is ethics? As I said, it's a philosophical theory of correct behavior. The word etike was a Greek word that meant something much more general, a way of life. Sort of, you may remember in Conversatio, they talked about ethos, which meant sort of a common shared cultural set of assumptions about how life ought to be lived. So the basic root meaning of ethics is that ethos, or way of life. And some ethical theories, especially ones like Aristotle's virtue ethics or the Christian ethics, retain that more ancient emphasis that talk about just how you should lead a good life. Whereas modern theories, like the 4 moral theories we'll look at, are more like procedures, rational procedures for determining correct behavior by following certain rules or tests for whether something is moral or immoral. So one of the first things we have to do in a core philosophical course on ethics is clarify our thinking. And oftentimes our thought on any matter is affected by all kinds of irrelevant considerations that sort of are associated with it, but which are not properly part of the subject matter. So the first thing we have to do is distinguish between what is ethical in the philosophical sense versus what's non-ethical. And the basic distinction is that philosophical ethics aims at determining what is right or wrong for anyone, objectively and universally, no matter what their religion, their interests, their beliefs, or projects. So philosophical ethics is categorical ethics. Categorical means you state it without qualifications. Sometimes we say no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There are lots of other types of considerations that can masquerade as ethical, or sometimes even called ethical, or use the words right or wrong, or good or bad, but which are not really strictly philosophically ethical or categorical. They don't apply universally, objectively, and categorically. They're merely hypothetical. A hypothetical statement says, if this is true, then you should do this. If you want to get to New York City, you should take a train, or you should fly an airplane. It doesn't say you have to take the train. It only says if you want to do this, then this is the way to do it. So there are lots of ethical statements, or statements that use the ethical words right and wrong or good, that are merely hypothetical, that you can opt out of by saying, well, I don't want to go to New York City. Or if you want to be a chemistry major, you should take organic chemistry. That doesn't say categorically you should take organic chemistry. You can opt out of it by saying, I don't want to be a chemist, so I'm not going to take organic chemistry. So that's what we mean by a philosophical ethics. What we're going to be interested in are not hypothetical statements of rightness or wrongness or goodness or badness, but those that appeal or apply categorically, that you should do it no matter what else you think, that you can't opt out of. So it'll probably be useful for us to sort of look at briefly the types of non-ethical uses of those terms. So there are things called professional ethics. So if you take nursing ethics or legal ethics or business ethics, um, there are rules in any profession which determine the best practices and standards of that profession that you have to follow in order to be certified, to be allowed to have that profession. Again, you can opt out of those by saying, I don't want to be a nurse or I don't want to be a doctor. And just because a profession requires this doesn't mean that it's really right or wrong to do that way. So, there are codes of ethics among thieves. They say there's honor even among thieves. But that doesn't mean that you should follow those rules about how to be a good thief or how to be accepted in the community or fraternity of thieves. The same is true of some religious rules. Catholics don't eat meat on Fridays in Lent. Jews follow kosher laws. Normally, we think that those are not standards that everyone of every religion has to follow, but only that you follow if you're a member of that religion. And you can opt out of those rules by saying, but I can eat meat on Fridays because I'm not Catholic, or I don't have to follow the kosher laws. The same is true of various different types of legal rules. So we can talk about whether something's against the law or whether it's legal. But of course, that doesn't mean that it's really morally right or wrong. Slavery was legal. The Holocaust was legal in Nazi Germany. So we should distinguish between what's legal and illegal from what's really morally right or wrong. We may like or hope that our professional ethics and our religious rules and our legal rules, our laws, really do reflect morality or are based upon morality, but they need not be. And there's also rules of etiquette, or what's socially acceptable or forbidden, what will make you shunned or get you canceled in contemporary culture. Again, those may be based upon moral rules, but they may not be. There's no moral reason why you have to use the fork on the outside before you use the fork on the inside, or why you have to drive on the right-hand side of the road. So those are some non-ethical uses of the word ethics, or right and wrong, based upon rules that are not categorical. You want to make sure that you avoid those in your philosophical arguments in this course. There are also lots of times where we use ethical like evaluations, like good and right and wrong, or best or worst, in ways that are not ethical in the sense that we're going to be talking about. So we talk about the things are beautiful in terms of good or bad. We can say it's a good sunset or a good painting or a good haircut by using standards of beauty. And that's closely related to evaluation in accordance with some standard. We can say that's a good piece of wood if it's true and sturdy and you can use it for your house, if it meets certain standards. When we say that that dog won best in show, we're not saying it's the morally best creature. We're saying it approximates certain standards that they have for that breed. In the same way, we can say that was a good catch they made in the baseball game, or she's a great singer, or you're a good student. We're saying that those are exemplifications of skill or excellence of a type. They don't mean that you're a moral person or you're the best person. You're worth more than somebody else. And of course, you can exhibit skill or excellence of a type and be completely immoral. You're a great rapist, or you're a good murderer, or you're an excellent thief or con man. So we can distinguish when something is good according to some skill or type or standard, or in accordance with its ability to produce some other goal or end, some hypothetical pleasure, goal, or end. When you say it's a good meal, or that's a good phone, that's the best phone that Consumer Reports recommends, or this is the best way to get to Cincinnati or wherever you want to go. Again, those are ways in which we use the word good, but which are hypothetical. They're good in relationship to some other standard, some other end, some other goal, or some other means of evaluation. So you have to be very, very careful in your arguments that you're not using arguments that you're going to turn out to be irrelevant because they're appealing to non-moral or non-ethical uses of the term good. So that's one of the most important things to do in the course. So in terms of the ethics that we're going to consider, the categorical ethics, there's sort of two different levels of ethical discussion that we're going to be engaged in. The first is just called ethics, and the second is called meta-ethics. Ethics is just philosophically determining categorically what the right thing to do is. For example, saying that killing is wrong, or we have a right to health care, that you should do this or that particular thing. Those are ethical judgments. But we're also going to be considering ethical theories, which are, if ethics is thinking about what's the right thing to do in some situation, then meta-ethics is thinking about thinking. It's thinking about ethics, thinking about how you should think about the best way to determine what morality is or what the right thing to do is. So these theories that we mentioned, the 5 units, correspond to different meta-ethical views. So in the unit quizzes that we'll have, and in our debates, we're going to be considering ethical questions like what should we do about climate change? What should we do about systemic racism? Is it immoral to have an abortion? Is homosexuality wrong? Those are ethical questions. On the final exam, as you'll see, when you get to the next part of this and see what you have to do and see the requirements for the course, the final exam question is going to ask you to choose the meta-ethical view that you agree with most, to choose some approach to how to think about ethics, to choose one of those 5 units or 5 approaches as the best way to think about morality. So, for example, is it the consequences of an act that make it right or wrong, or is it the intention of the act, what you were intending to do? Is going to be a meta-ethical question that we'll take up in relationship to the 4 ethical theories that we'll talk about. So it might be useful just to mention just different basic meta-ethical approaches to moral theory, different ways of thinking about how you think about when something is right or wrong. One that we're not going to talk too much about, although it is a serious possibility for a meta-ethical theory, is called relativism or emotivism. This may be a view that you might find yourself attracted to, which says that morality is relative to a person's culture or maybe their biological makeup. Or it's just an expression of their emotions from that culture or from their biology or from the way that they were brought up by their parents. We'll see that, of course, this is really just a way of saying that, according to the definition we gave of ethics as categorical, there really is no such thing as ethics. And studying this would be a study of anthropology or sociology or psychology or biology, studying the physical, social, and psychological causes of our beliefs about morality. So ethical theories, remember, can't be opted out of. They're categorical. Relativism and emotivism believe that you can always opt out of any moral opinion by recognizing that you're not part of that culture. You weren't brought up by those parents. You're not part of that religion. You don't have that biology. And of course, that's a serious philosophical question. Asking, are there really any categorical moral judgments that you can't opt out of? But of course, we can't have a course in ethics and start from the principle that there is no such thing as ethics. Philosophy courses are strange that way, though, because it'll probably be the only course that you'll take where on the final exam you can get an A in the course by proving that the course was nonsense or proving that the course was useless. So on the final exam, you certainly can argue for relativism and emotivism. If you can show that all of the different attempts that we use to try to come up with a categorical moral theory fail, and you can argue for it, then this might be a position that you could argue for successfully on the final exam. But during the semester, we're going to rule a relativism or emotivism out of bounds, as we'll see in the next slide. There are also teleological approaches to ethics, which start with the idea of goodness, and there are deontological theories that are not based upon a theory of the good, but begin with right action. We'll talk more about those right now. So I said that we're not going to allow you, at least in the beginning of the course, to say, well, everybody has, whether it's right or wrong, to have health care or climate change, and what you think about poverty is really just your opinion, and nobody can tell anybody else what to think about those things. Because most people, there are three different reasons why we're not going to allow you to be a relativist in this course. Although, as I said, you might do well on the final exam by finally arguing for relativism or emotivism as your favorite meta-ethical approach to the course. Because most people are, in fact, not really relativist. You do give reasons, and you expect them to affect other people. If I walked up to you and slapped you really hard on the head, you would say, hey, stop that. That's not right to hit somebody on the head right there. And if I said, well, that's just your point of view, and from my point of view, I think it's wonderful to smack people on the head, you would not say, oh, okay, in the same way that if I said, I really prefer not to eat broccoli because I'm allergic to it or I don't like it. You would say, oh, okay, that's okay not to like broccoli. But if I smacked you in the head, you would think that even if I believed that it was right, and I'd been raised to think that it was right, that I was acting immorally. And you would give reasons, and you would expect the reasons you gave for not hitting you in the head to appeal and apply to me. So no one's really a relativist when it comes down to push and shove when people start doing bad things to them. And in practice, this may be a practical consideration because in students, relativism becomes an excuse not to think or to justify oneself or to become any more self-conscious of why you think the things that you do and what assumptions and intuitions your opinions are based upon. So we want you to think, so we're not going to allow you easy outs by just saying, this is my opinion, or everybody can have their own point of view. And I don't have to think about what they think or ask why their intuitions or evidence applies to me. So you have reasons that are based upon intuitions and feelings and examples, and you can become more self-conscious of your beliefs by examining them and arguing for them. That's the point of the course. That's what you'll be evaluated in the course for. Opting out of that process by saying it's just my opinion or who's to say is opting out of the whole purpose of the course. So we're not going to let you do that. So the subtitle for this course was Doing Good and Being Good, which distinguishes between right action and then good things. Right is a property that we apply to actions, and good is a property that we apply to things. Both of those are moral. So there are basically two different approaches to moral theory that we're going to talk about that emphasize one or the other of the right and the good. Those that emphasize the good are called teleological theories, coming from the Greek word telos, which means end or good. Obviously, if moral theory has to be categorical, it can't be an end or a good that you can opt out of. So teleological theories all think that there are metaphysical, which has to do with the very nature of reality, some things that are good and bad, no matter what biology you have, what culture you come from, what planet you come from, or what religion you have. So teleological theories all make certain metaphysical assumptions, and they think you figure out what the right thing to do is by seeing what the good is. And different moral theories that we're going to talk about will do that in different ways. Aristotle's virtue theory is going to ask what things are good for a human being, what things will fulfill our nature. Utilitarianism will ask about the goodness of the consequences of our action and saying it's what follows from our actions, how they affect the world and their consequences that matter. And natural law will say, how does our intention in performing them relate to certain natural laws or basic goods? Deontological theory, which is a strange word, it just means to, just like you would desugarize or de-fatize some food by taking the sugar out or taking the fat out. Deontological theories get the ontology. Ontos is the word, or ontological is another word for metaphysical, theory about reality. So deontological theories attempt to get the metaphysics, or sometimes the religion, out of ethics. They arose during the Enlightenment. Immanuel Kant's theory will be our example of it. And when they saw that different people from different religions would have different moral theories based upon their different assumptions about whether there's a God and an afterlife and what they think God wants, they tried to come up with theories that would evaluate the right, what was the right thing to do, what moral action was, without making assumptions about what the good was, without making metaphysical or religious assumptions. So much of our Enlightenment politics is based upon the idea of deontological theories. And many contemporary moral theories will be deontological theories. So those are the basic approaches that we're going to be studying in moral theory during the semester. And as I said, most of what we're going to be doing is going to be arguing and considering evidence for moral theory. So it might be useful just to talk for a second about how argumentation and evidence for moral theories works. As we get into the course, we'll be spending lots of time seeing what an argument is, how do you object, how do you respond, and learning some of the philosophical tools for making arguments in ethical questions. But it may help to realize that the pattern we're following is one you already know in science. On the left here, you can see the pattern you're familiar with, where you have a hypothesis or an idea, and then you formulate an experiment and go to the world and test it, and you get data from that experiment. And then that data either can agree with your hypothesis and confirm it, or more often it will disagree with it in some way, and you'll have to revise your hypothesis. And then you can go through this, have a revised hypothesis, now test it again in an experiment, and revise it and fine tune it. In some way, that's the same process you're going to follow in ethics. The philosopher John Rawls, who we're going to read, called this process reflective equilibrium, where you start with an opinion. You have an idea about what you think about abortion, or what you think about climate change, or what you think about capitalism. And it may be based upon certain moral intuitions that you have. Intuitions are like common ground examples. They're things that we think all of us would agree with. Our data, the facts, the evidence in moral theory are going to be these types of intuitions, these grounding intuitions that we think that everyone would agree with. So you start out with an opinion like killing is wrong, but then somebody can have, you can test it against your intuitions. Somebody can say, well, what about self-defense or in war? Everyone would think that you're allowed to kill if there's no other alternative, if someone's coming at you with a knife. Or most people think that it's justifiable to kill in the case of war. So you test your opinion against basic common ground examples or intuitions. We call them common ground because everyone would agree with them. And if not everyone would agree with them, then they don't serve as facts. They're not common ground intuitions then we would revise our opinion and say, well, maybe I just believe that it's wrong to kill an innocent life. And that would rule out my intuitions or my counterexamples of war or self-defense. And then we have to think, are there any other examples where we think it's okay to kill an innocent life, until we finally find an opinion that's in equilibrium with all of the various different examples or intuitions we have. So in some cases, our evidence are going to be facts about the world, since they'll be relevant to our intuitions and relevant to understanding the situations involved. But most often, moral evidence isn't going to be facts about the world. After the facts are established, then we have to go to our intuitions, these common ground examples that tell us what we believe. And that's why, in some ways, we're ruling out relativism, because we're really not interested in convincing other people of their morality. I'm not trying to convince you of any one form of moral belief or other. What we're trying to do is to determine what you believe. And therefore, we are going to base our moral beliefs upon what we think in these common ground examples, not what somebody else thinks, but what you think. So you're looking to form a self-conscious reflective equilibrium between your intuitions in a wide range of examples and your opinions. And oftentimes, like most human beings, we're a little bit muddled and confused about what our opinions are, because we may think that killing is okay in some cases and not in other cases, or we may have an offhand opinion. But when we ask about a certain set of examples, we find we have intuitions in some of those examples that disagree with our opinion. So the idea is, by thinking and arguing, considering opposing people, considering the common ground counterexamples they would give, we revise our opinion, become more self-conscious of what we actually think. And that's what you'll be graded on, the depth and the skill with which you figure out what you really think by considering all of the evidence. So your grade is going to depend upon mainly your ability to consider evidence and consider counterexamples, and to give evidence, respond to evidence against you, and then revise your opinion in response to that counter evidence and reach a considered opinion. You're not going to be graded at all in what position you hold or your opinions. At a place like St. Anselm, oftentimes you may have found that it helps if you agree with one position rather than another, or to hold the company line. It makes absolutely no difference to your grade whatsoever. You can get a perfectly good grade arguing against every Catholic position in this course, or you can get a perfectly good grade arguing for every Catholic position in this course. What matters is going to be how well you're able to consider all the evidence, both for and against your position, and how well you're able to weave that evidence together into a considered opinion that supports your position. So that's what the course is going to be about. You can advance to the next slide and start to hear what the requirements and grading policies for the course and what you actually have to do.